everybody, this is Maki on my channel. Welcome. Here we talk about crafts. I make the beaded bags tutorial, but I also started knitting recently, and I was asked to share my tips on how to start knitting garments, specifically sweaters, because that's what I've been doing. So I thought, why not record a talking video to tell about my experiences, and maybe you would find something useful for yourself. So a little background, I live in Finland and it's really cold, and I'm also a Swiftie. So I've been obsessed with this folklore cardigan, and I couldn't buy it because it's always sold out and it costs hundreds of euros if you want to repurchase it from eBay. And I was like, how hard could it be if I just learn how to knit? And a lot of my friends knit, and I was like, I do a lot of crafts, so that's like one that I haven't been able to master yet. And I was like, well, why not now? And also I was really excited that I could choose the materials myself instead of, buying the ones that are already made. And it's just not the same. It doesn't hit the same when you can like touch the yarn and decide how soft you want it to be and how the color should go, and etc, etc. So I was like, okay, I need to know how to knit. And I decided to start from a small item to understand how the basic stitch works. But here's the first tip that I would give you as a new knitter. Have motivation. Because I was told, like, start small and start some quick projects, and on paper it's fine. Like, you will learn how to do basic stitches, but you will end up with a lot of random small garments laying around in your house. And I don't know if you really want that. I was like, I don't want to have useful garments laying around in my house. I rather make something that I will use. Or why not just go and start making the folklore cardigan that I want to make initially? So the second tip is don't listen to a lot of like advice either. So do what feels good for you. Don't listen to very specific advice on like start with chunky yarn, make a beanie. Like, what if you don't want to have a beanie? What if you live in a warm climate and you don't need a beanie? Like, make something that you want to have. Maybe you found an inspiration on some social media, or you saw some garment in a shop and you were like, I think I could knit that, or I think I could crochet that. Start with that and see how it goes, basically. For me, I wanted a folklore cardigan, and there was nothing that would make me make anything else at that point, because I was like, I'm just gonna make a folklore cardigan and call it a day. I'm not a knitter, I don't want to be. This is the garment that I knit, and that's not my first sweater after. So you can imagine, like, I got hooked. And yeah, so my first garment is this cardigan. And things that I would like you to know, like the mistakes that I made with this cardigan. First, you need to make the swatch gauge, the gauge swatch, or whatever it's called. So take each piece of pattern. Like, for example, there are different kind of braids on this sweater, and ideally you should take the yarn that you are supposed to work with and make a swatch, just like a piece of the pattern, and you will know how many stitches there are per 10 centimeters. So in my case, I was like, I think I took a kind of a similar thickness of yarn, judging on the measurements of the yarn that was used in the pattern. And the problem is that I'm a tight knitter. That's another thing that I will talk about later. And whatever gauge is basically how many stitches and rows are per 10 centimeters square of your knitted part, like garment. So depending on the pattern that is used, depending on the way that you knit, if you're a loose knitter or a tight knitter, you might be able to fit more or less stitches in the square than the yarn says. So the yarn usually tells you the gauge, so you can kind of estimate how big your garment will look. And they have the recommended needle size for each yarn. And with this recommended size, you are supposed to get the certain amount of stitches and rows in a 10 per 10 centimeter square. But on practice, it also depends on how tight you knit. So you should probably do a swatch. Like, I would really recommend you to do the swatch and see how big, and important part, wash your swatch after you knit it, so that you can see how the fabric behaves after a wash. Because again, I bought merino yarn for this sweater because I like the feel of it, and I didn't want it to be like overwhelmingly warm. But the good stuff about merino, it doesn't keep you too hot inside, and it doesn't keep you, it kind of maintains your body temperature at an optimal level, but it's still wool, so it's still pretty warm, and it's soft, it's not itchy. So that was like the decision making factor for me. And I bought it and I was told that it stretches out quite a lot. So I didn't make the gauge swatch. I was like, okay, there are too many braids. I don't even know how to make braids, like the cables. I had no idea how to knit, imagine. Like, the only thing I knitted was this thing, and then I was like, enough, I know enough about knitting, let's do cables. And so yeah, I didn't do the gauge. And good thing about merino, it stretches, so it saved me in the end. So what I did after I made the garment, it was really tight on me, like, frankly, like the sleeve, it was like super tight. So yeah, I laid the garment flat and I matched the measurements of the garment as per the pattern, because the pattern usually tells you the size after the wash. And thanks to the stretchiness of merino, it stretched out really nicely and it fits my body very nicely. Like, it's not too tight, it's not too slouchy. It's the way I wanted it to be, because I want to wear it kind of casually to work or to places, and I don't want it to scream that it's a folklore cardigan, but the Swifties would know, and I know. So that was like a few lessons that I learned with making that is gauge. You always need to make the gauge swatch of all the patterns, because like there's ribbing, there's stockinette, which is the plain, like on this sweater for example, there's garter stitch, which is this, and all kinds of different stitches, cables, and you need to understand how it matches the pattern, the gauge. So how many stitches there are in your 10 to 10 piece needs to match the pattern so that there is no surprise. A lot of people skip this step, and as a beginner you should not, because then you will end up with funky fitting garments, you will lose motivation, and it's just not fun. Next sweater that I decided to work on is not something that I would recommend for beginners. This is Mohair with silk, and it was painful, honestly. Like, it twists, it gets all like messed up, and it's a raglan sweater, and it's really difficult to see the raglan lines on mohair silk when you do it like a net kind of situation. So don't overwhelm yourself with such projects unless you absolutely want to have this kind of sweater and this is what you want to start knitting with. Because as I said, it's different for each person, and you should not probably listen to all the advice that people give you, because you should figure out what works for you. But for me, that was the most challenging project, honestly, even though the pattern is super easy. I learned how to change colors, because when you knit in the round and you have different stripes, there's a little step that you get when you switch the color. It's hard to explain. If you want, I can make another video on how to fix that problem. But right now, just know that don't do any like colorful projects as beginning things unless you want the garment really bad. Having said that, I used the same pattern to make this chunky sweater, which I absolutely adore, and I think I ate some of it now. This is wool, so it's really nice in winter in Finland. Like, it kept me really warm through -20. And here I have a few problems that you will know when you start knitting. First of all, I followed the pattern very like closely, and it said pick up a certain amount of stitches for the underarm, and I did, and I have holes here. So What some patterns don't tell you is that, you see here, what some patterns don't tell you is if you feel that it's a bit holy, you should pick up more stitches on the underarm and then just reduce the amount of stitches in the second round to the ones that are initially stated in the pattern. This way you will avoid the holes and you will keep the amount of stitches to according to the pattern. I didn't know back then, so I'm stuck with the holy sweater, but I can fix it always by just like seaming, which I don't want to do, and I don't look under my arm. It's none of my business. If somebody sees it, joke's on you, not my problem. Sorry. Another problem that I have with the sweater is that it doesn't have short rows. Short rows is what makes your back feels like, basically, your back requires more fabric than your front, so that the neckline sits comfortably on your neck and it doesn't strangle you. With this sweater, with the chunky yarn, it's not always recommended to do, and like I see patterns that don't include short rows with chunkier yarn, but I would still recommend to try if you feel that you're comfortable with short rows. I would recommend you to do them. Basically, short rows make your back a little bit bigger than the front, so instead of being like purely vertical, so this sweater doesn't have short rows, so you see that the back and the neck are the same height. The short rows would make the front go a little bit lower than the back, or let's say the back would be a little bit higher, because you basically add not complete rows, but short rows, which means they go from about here to about, like, they go around the back, and you slowly increase the rows until they fully, like, they connect in a circle. So this way you'll make the neck shaping much nicer. I didn't know that back then. I know it now, and I'm not gonna unravel the sweater until the neck just to do that. I think that it's comfortable enough, and you can maybe wash the sweater. I haven't tried it, but you could maybe wash your sweater and pull it a little bit so that the back is higher than the front. I didn't do that because it takes forever to dry it, and it's also very chunky and smells. Like when you wash wool, it smells, and I don't like that smell. So I just decided to keep it the way it is now, and I'm fine with that, but you know, you do you. Another thing that I started to increase complexity of my work, and I made this sweater for my husband. And here you can see that there are short rows because then the back is popping behind the front. So this sweater actually included a lot of tips, and I really like the pattern. I totally recommend the pattern. I will put every pattern in the description. Or at least I want to put this pattern because I feel like it's very nice. It had a lot of tips, and yeah, with this pattern I realized how important it is to work on the gauge, because I ordered the yarn based on the gauge of the yarn and the gauge of the project, and I knitted a swatch, and turned out it was like, I'm a tight knitter as I already mentioned, so it turned out that the gauge was like, I could fit more stitches in a 10 by 10 swatch. So I ended up using 2 strands of yarn to match the gauge of the sweater, and it fits perfectly. Like, it sits on my husband. Moving on to materials and things that I would find useful when I just started. First of all, choosing the needles for your projects. My first project, I knitted this one with bamboo needles. I didn't need them to be circular, but I just find it more convenient because the weight of the garment is going to be on the cable and not on your needles, which you actively try to move. They're not very slippery, so as a beginner you might find it good that your stitches don't fall off and you don't lose track of what you're making. But for me, as a tight knitter, I hate this because they don't have enough, like, they have too much friction, and my stitches just don't move because I pull everything so tightly. And I like being a tight knitter because everything looks very put together, but I decided to switch to metal needle. With the metal needles, what you need to know is some needles are more pointy than other needles. So these were the first ones that I bought. These are, I don't know which brand it is, but they are not very pointy, which is nice because when you constantly push on the needle to move the stitches, you don't hurt your finger. But this is very difficult because I don't know where, but these needles are difficult in the sense that to pick up the stitches, it's harder when the needle is not pointy. So there are ups and downs to this. And then I figured out that instead of buying new needles every time, I would just get a set of them. That is, I don't think that's very necessary because they're expensive. And if you don't need as much as often, then you don't really need a set of needles. But I figured that I really want to continue knitting, so I bought a set of interchangeable needles. And what's good in them is that even if you don't want to buy a huge set, you can invest into pieces. For example, for the next project you need thicker needles or longer cable. So instead of buying full needle, you buy interchangeably cables and needles. These are pointier than the other ones, so I actually hurt my fingers when I knit sometimes, but it's worth it because I really like that it's easy to pick up stitches with the pointy needles, and also you can buy an extension to connect the cables, which is very, very handy if you plan to knit a lot. Also, another thing is stitch markers are very important in my opinion, but you don't need to buy super fancy ones. You can use, I don't know, the pins, or you can use your earrings, you can use rings, you can use anything in the beginning if you don't want to spend money on stitch markers. But they're important, especially in like Fair Isle kind of sweaters where the pattern repeats, for example. You need to fix the pattern so that you don't lose track of what you're making, or fix where your start of the row is so it's evenly, just like, you know what I mean. But yeah, the next thing I want to talk to you about is different types of yarn and how I pick the yarn that I want to work with. I avoid plastic yarn because when plastic peels, it's basically microplastics, and I don't like that. I actually opted for knitting instead of buying sweaters because I want to make sure that my sweaters are made of natural fibers. I think acrylic might be cheaper. I don't know. I don't look at acrylic yarn at all for microplastics reason. And also when I wash garments, I can see that, for example, this sweater loses a lot of like strands, like it sheds. And I sleep well at night knowing that it's made of natural fibers, so if it sheds and it ends up in the water, it's at least naturally biodegradable fabric and not like some plastics. And yeah, so sock yarn, for example, it has polyamide, and that's why I don't knit socks, because I feel kind of bad. So, and I'm planning to knit socks out of very thick chunky wool instead. I don't know how durable that's gonna be, but at least I'm gonna feel good about it. And wool is usually the itchiest fabric. Alpaca is a bit less itchy, and the least itchy wool is merino wool. So just make sure that you know how sensitive your skin is before you buy a certain type of yarn. There is like treated wool and virgin wool. Virgin wool is the most itchy one, and there are like treated yarns that are less itchy basically. So just think about it. And merino is the least warm, but also not, it doesn't itch at all. And of course there's cotton and mohair, which is also a bit itchy. Alpaca is less itchy in general, so think about that when you buy like yarn basically. Otherwise I don't really do much in terms of selecting yarns. When I wash my garments, I place a little paper that soaks up the color, because if there are different colors used in the sweater, I want to make sure that one color doesn't like tint the other color. So I always put a little paper, and I also wash by hand only. I don't remove water like this. I kind of do these movements with the wool sweaters to make sure I don't stretch them out. I always dry flat, and I don't use washing machine, but I think some yarns can be washed in the washing machine. I just play it safe because I spend too much time making my sweaters. I also wash in cold water and with a special wool silk detergent, so it's very delicate. Another reason why I opt for natural fibers is because acrylic yarn and most plastic yarns in general, they hold on to your smell. So if, for example, you sweat a lot and you smell, with wool you can like air it out in the cold weather, for example, as far as I know. Don't follow my guidelines, maybe you need to wash your garment, I don't know, but the plastic yarn really like keeps the smell much more than natural fibers. So that's why. And also when if your garment ends up in the landfill, it's much nicer when it's all natural. Recycling with plastics is harder, and recycling a blend is harder, so that's why I don't use blends when there's like plastic and natural fibers together. But that's just me. I don't judge anyone, but that's my take on this subject. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you want more, subscribe, leave the comments if you have questions, recommendations. Be kind. That's all I want to tell you. Be kind to yourself, be kind to other people on the internet, and be kind to me. Thank you. And if you want more content, just hit me up.